trigger. Hello everyone, this is Locko S, and in today's video we're going to be actually going into some more advanced AI and logic creation in our missions with the trigger page. The trigger page is accessed here through this icon here. It looks like sort of like a bridge and like two dots on either end. This is the trigger page, and with trigger and also like general. This is like more of your advanced mission logic as well. So you go ahead and triggers. The trigger page is set up in 3 different areas. So you have each individual trigger is here as its own menu, and clicking this fills in the conditions and actions for that trigger. So if we had a second trigger here, it would have a whole bunch of different conditions, and then its resulting output once those conditions are met. So to go over the different trigger types with this one right here, not to touch our example here for later on, there are 4 types of triggers. Once happens only one time once the conditions and the conditions page are met, and outputs the actions one time. This is good if you want basically something to happen once and only once. Repetitive action. For every second that these conditions are met, these actions will trigger. 3 for switch conditions is every time these conditions switch from false to true, these actions will play out. So if you have, for instance, something go false to true, it'll play these actions once, and then if it remains true, nothing else will happen different. But if those conditions then switch to false, and then back to true, back to false, and then back to true again, these conditions would play on the second time it goes from false to true. You can have this set up so that you can have basically inverses as well. So you can have one switch condition to do basically if these are all true, play the actions, and you can also basically set up another clone of that where you have the conditions if basically the inverse conditions. If the inverse conditions are true, then you can play another set of actions to basically reset the world, so to speak, or to reset things, so to speak. So you can have 2 switch conditions, and they can sort of play off each other like that. Mission start is a very useful one. Mission start is basically something that's placed at the very beginning of the mission, regardless. I wouldn't put any conditions in for mission start just because the whole idea of mission start is at mission start, it plays these actions before before the player really has any control over the mission. So I would like to use mission start to basically do a whole bunch of things like making sure flags are set at certain things, having definitely for script files. You definitely want to play your script files at the beginning of a mission. You can also use it to, for instance, let us see here if I can set this up right, if I can find it. Underneath effects, you can have different effects playing that you want at the beginning of the mission to play. You can have certain things set up for if you want to clear out an area, you can have, there's a action in here to basically set a scenery destruction zone where it looks like a certain area of the city's already been, a certain amount of pre-run destructions have already been bombed out, stuff like that. So mission start's really good for using the in-game actions for the mission editor to set up the mission beforehand. But we're going to go back over to triggers here, and then go over to conditions. Conditions are basically everything that you want to set up to have in order for the logic to play out. So for conditions, you have quite a few. I'm going to actually start a new condition here so we don't mess up that too much again. There's a whole bunch of different conditions. So you can have all of the coalition in the zone. You can have different things also, like all of a group in zone. You can have a unit in zone or outside zone. The zone conditions are all basically zones are something that you set up in the mission editor, and I'll show that in the next video. And zones are basically ways to give a certain area of the map sort of a logical trigger, or to use it for certain actions as a source point. And I'll set that up in another. So I'll show you how to set up zones in another video. But you can use zones to create logic here. Other conditions that are fairly commonplace are to use the unit's speed higher than, lower than, altitude less than conditions here to basically see if a unit is within certain parameters of flight. For instance, I like to use a combination of these to basically determine if a plane is landed. Another good one is group below, group alive less than, and you can think of this group alive less than as a sort of group health indicator. So let's use this for the heavy AA, for instance. Go over here. So over here you see this group of 6 flak guns, and if we say the group is alive less than, say, 60%, that means when 3 of the gun batteries are down, so basically, or you know what, we'll make it even really simple. If the group is alive less than 65%, that means that when 2 of the gun battery, when 2 of these guns are killed, that means the group is at 60% health because there's 3 out of 5 guns alive, and then that way, when it goes to evaluate this logical condition, it'll go, hey, the group is at 60% health. It turns true. So you can use this basically to determine how much damage a group has taken. This is really highly recommended if you're trying to do a mission where you're trying to take out a convoy, but you basically wanted to have it be sort of like, okay, they only really need to take out like half of the convoy in order for it to be a mission success. Like you've done enough damage to the convoy if you've taken out like half of the group, so you can use this to set up conditions like that. You can also use group dead if you want the group to be entirely killed. You can also use it for certain individual units within a group. So if you want to target, say, the track radar or the search radar within a SAM site, you can do group dead. You can say you can unit dead, and then you can select whatever you have set up for the search. You can set up and look for the name of the actual track and search radars, have them be conditions, and then have that as your win condition. See here, other things I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you guys. You can also check to see the state of a flag. So flags are basically variables in the game engine, and you can have it to be either a flag is false or a logical false, which is logical false, which equals a binary 0 or a value of 0, and then the flags are not given variable names, they're just given numbers. So if flag 1 is set to 0, or which would equate to logical false, it'll register this condition as true. If the flag is less than a value, it'll you can use flag is less to say, hey, if this flag has a value of less than 10, it'll also ring true. So you can use flags sort of as variables for numerical values. And you can play around with the different flag conditions to work with that. There is also a flag condition that is, let's see here, underneath T, because you could also do a flag condition called time since flag. And this basically is the time since the flag has gone from a logical false to a logical true. And then you can use this basically to add a delay in your mission logic, whereas like if once certain conditions are met, you can do a flag. You can set a certain flag from true, and then once you set that flag true, you can then do another condition, another trigger, where you then have a condition that says the time since. You can have a time since that flag was triggered in a certain amount of seconds, and then it'll play out a different set of actions. So that's how you can set up those. You can also then do one last one that I found useful is random. Random basically sets a random percentage of a flag being true or false. So you kind of use this to add a little bit of randomness to your missions. Make, for instance, in one case, have a one group spawn, but in a lesser chance, there's a lesser chance of a different group spawning. Stuff like that. You can add a little bit of randomness to your missions. There's another way to add randomness to your missions using flags, because you can also then set, and I'll show you in actions that there's a key to do that, and that'd probably be a whole nother video going over the full explanation of how you set it up. But just letting you know that is a thing that you can do. But the important thing to note about conditions is you can have more than one condition. So we can say that, for instance, it's been 600 seconds or 10 minutes since the flag 1 was turned true, and say all of our group has retreated, is in this one zone. So combining multiple conditions puts an and condition between the two, or an and operand between the two, where both this and this has to be true in order for the condition to be true. You can add a logical or operation into this, and it places it after the conditions. And then you can also set up a second group of conditions to be true. So you could have, let's say, all a group in zone, and you can have a different group in the zone. And if you want to copy other conditions, by the way, clone, and use the arrow buttons to move it around. So you could have basically this condition read, the time since the flag has been 1 in either one of these conditions. So if 10 minutes have passed since flag 1 has turned true for either aerial 1 group or aerial 2 group is in a certain zone, then this condition will ring true. So you can use and, so that's how you use set up and conditions for your, that's how you set up and logical conditions for your conditions, and then how you separate those and conditions into separate buckets with or groups. And if you're familiar with binary logic, and I come from an electronics background, there are certain microprocessor chips that do logical ORs with binaries. This will make perfect sense. I might have to do, if you look up basically and or logical. Excuse me. If you look up and or logic groups on YouTube, you can kind of get an idea of how you could do the map and how the math and the quote unquote math, and it'll explain kind of the logic between like ands and ors. I think that's the only 2 logical operands we have, and for DCS, we don't have the really fun ones like NOR or exclusive ORs. Those aren't really a thing in DCS, sadly. But ands and ors give you plenty of flexibility in game. So we're going to go ahead let's set up that row again real quick. You can also do flag is less than flag for a comparison between flags. That's another thing you can do. So let's see here. Time since flag 600, and then again we'll say all of this group is in a zone. And we don't have any zones to choose from. Again, we'll go over zones in a different thing. So we're going to go ahead and with this fictitious trigger, go talk about actions now. These are all the actions that will play out when these conditions are met. So when the conditions are met. So again, it's either this one group as a condition, and if we had an or group, that's in a condition. You can have multiple or groups, by the way, but in any case, if the conditions page here ever rings true, these actions are what will play out. Some things that we can, some examples of things you can do with actions are pushing AI tasks, and this is where you can use the triggered actions in a unit's page to trigger actions outside of waypoints. So you can use logical triggers to set up an action for a group rather than a waypoint, rather than having the logic play out on a waypoint. You can use message to groups, so you can do message to all, message to a coalition, to country, to group, to unit. If you're doing a single player mission, message to all works fine. Might be a good catch-all. That way you don't end up displaying the message to the wrong country or the wrong group and wonder what's going on. You can also do radio transmission. You can set up a radio transmission on a certain frequency from a certain zone. That way, you can basically give out information on a radio channel. If you have an audio file playing audio, I do believe under you can also do sound to all. So this is another way. If you don't want to use the radio system to transmit a message, you can do sound. So this is kind of sort of like a you can play basically an audio message without the player having to tune into a certain radio frequency. You can also end a mission. And ending a mission is the generic, it is both having the mission end on a success or failure. So you can have the mission end in a red winner, or a blue winner, or a neutral winner, and obviously the other side loses. So you can set win and loss conditions based on that, and then it'll actually end the mission for the player automatically without having them to go to like the quit mission and then take them back to the mission page. I do believe setting up campaigns also uses a similar method, but that's a whole nother series of videos going into campaign creation, which we're not going to get to today. You can also start an effect, and this is something you would want to do for mission start. So you can have it also play out during the middle of the mission, but if you're trying to set up a scene, like if you're trying to set up a destroyed city or a city in the middle of a battle before the player gets to it, you would use mission start for this. Otherwise, if during the middle of the mission, say, we can go up here, the unit's dead, say, was you killed that RWR unit, go down here, and we can place a zone on the top of the unit as a marker, and then we can have affect smoke, and then we can have basically a small smoke and fire on that unit, so it looks like it's still on fire. You can start effects that way. You can start effects at the beginning of the mission so that they're already playing when the player gets there, etc., etc. You can also change the state of a flag. Let's go ahead and delete this. So we're not going to get the zones today. So underneath here, we have flag increase, decrease, on, off. This basically, flag on turns it to a logical, sets the flag to a value of 1, and then which makes it a logical true. Flag off sets the flag's value to 0, which makes it a logical false. And then you can increase and decrease the flag by a certain value if you're using it to as sort of less of a true false binary indicator and more of a sort of as a numerical variable. And then you can also use it to spawn in units with the, I believe it's group activate. Yeah, there we go. You can have group activate, and it'll actually spawn in units that have the late activation tag attached to them. Keep in mind, activating groups later in the mission, because they're not spawned in yet, will cause a lag. This is more of a, it's good if you have a lot of units in the mission and you're activating them later to keep the number of units manageable, but it will cause a lag spike. Even on more powerful systems, it'll cause a minor lag spike as the units are loaded in. Sometimes it's not noticeable. Sometimes it is, depending on how big the group how many groups you're activating, and how big they are. But that is an option. You can also use group AI on, and there's other ways to get units to spool up, but still have them preloaded in the mission. But group activate is it's one way to be certain. It's one way to manage the amount of groups that are actively physically in the game at one time. But there are other ways to spawn in units, like with telling the aircraft to do a AI task push for start. Turning on the group AI is another one for other reasons. There's plenty of other ways you can adjust the group AI to activate. So, some key points in mission editing, because I don't want this video to go on for too long, because you can really dive into a lot of the different conditions and actions and how to set up different things. Naming conventions are important. You definitely want to make sure, after you create a whole bunch of triggers, you might want to go back and make sure you name your mission your triggers so you know what triggers do what. Also, naming conventions for your units, if you've been doing them throughout the mission, also make it easier to find individual units as well as groups. So that way you're not going through a whole bunch of units that somehow have the same name, like static 84E C1, C1-2. Like, it can get pretty complicated trying to find them. So giving the units that you know you want to play with within the trigger system distinct names really helps find them. You can also use the color editor down here to go ahead and color your different mission logics, so you can kind of get an idea of what, generally at a glance, like I'm looking for instance like more of like AI logic for the enemy AI. You'd put up red, for instance. If you want to do, oh, I'm looking for like triggers that are going to adjust how the blue team, the blue forward does things. Change it to blue, stuff like that. It's a useful tool to keep track of what triggers do what, like different logical groups, especially when things get complicated. Cloning logic, either for triggers or conditions or even actions, is a good way to have multiple similar things of that type repeated. So if you want to make, so for instance, if you want to do conditions for unit dead and you want a whole bunch of specific units dead that are not in like that are not tied to like one particular group, you can do like unit dead, unit dead, unit dead, unit dead, and have these all be different units without having to go to new, scroll all the way down, find it, stuff like that. Don't be overly strict with certain conditions, by the way. It is quite possible, DCS being DCS sometimes, where sometimes you might not be able to get like a 100% kill instant, for instance, on like a convoy. If you're trying to do like a landing condition, the unit's altitude might not read exactly 0 because of the landing gear and how the game registers the unit at 0, an altitude of 0, stuff like that. You don't want to be overly strict with your conditions, otherwise it'll be basically nearly impossible to trigger them. Even though the player on their end sees, oh, I killed everything, or oh, I landed, why am I not getting the mission condition that I've landed? Again, use mission start trigger type to set up stuff at the beginning. And make sure when you do display messages, you make sure you do give players enough time to read them. So the default is 15 seconds. I like to give a minimum usually of 25. If I start filling up this whole text box, I would give it like 45 seconds for them to read it, stuff like that. You can also use messages to in addition to playing sounds or what's it called? Radio transmissions, to basically allow the player to have subtitles. And that's a good quality of life thing just to do in general. That way, players can know that there's an audio file playing, and maybe if sometimes the things sound garbled or they're too busy, or they can just look up in the corner and just quickly read it and go, that's what's happening. Also, if you do like I do, and you use one mission to recreate a template for the next mission in a series, make sure you go back to the trigger page and you clear out the trigger page of any unneeded logic. It just helps keep mission logic clean, and it helps prevent AI units from doing things that they're not supposed to be doing for that particular mission. And like I said, also make sure when you do triggers, if you're don't bother setting up a whole lot of conditions without setting up at least one action. If you do something, for instance, like this, where you set up a whole bunch of different conditions without giving it an action, and you, for instance, somehow misclick or you deliberately go out of the trigger page, it'll wipe out that trigger. So that's something just to keep in mind, that you definitely want to be careful with creating too many conditions without at least one action, so that way you're not skipping your work. So that's pretty much it for all the stuff I wanted to go over for the mission logic. Before I go real quick, going through the our example here for what mission logic we've created here for this mission. So as a quick final review, this mission trigger is the mission goal complete. It's not going to end the mission. It's just going to say that, hey, you've completed the mission's goal. Its condition is unit is dead for the RWR site. So down here, that's the EWR site. It'll then display this message, and I'll show. We'll lock it. I'll probably do I might do a cut. I'll probably do another video showcasing this example mission, and then you'll see that mission logic play out. I'm not going to add it onto this video. I think this is going on a little bit too long, but regardless, that's how that mission example logic plays out. So, giving kind of a little bit of an example of how you can use it in your missions. And yeah, definitely use mission. Definitely use the message tool to give your players feedback. Tell them that, hey, you've completed the mission. Gives a little more polish to your mission, just like briefings, just like how creating a mission briefing gives more polish to your mission. On that note, I want to do one more mission logic video for at least the basics before I do a different line of videos, and that's going to be for the mission editor logic for zones. That is this button down here. We'll talk about that in the next video, and then after that, a little bit of a preview is I want to talk about setting up some of the special options for aircraft in-game for players and clients. So you can definitely see here, for example, the Harrier has all these different options. I want to go through those. I want to go through the loadout for the payload pages for them and talk about some payload restrictions and some payload notes on different aircraft. And I want to mix some of those with using what we've learned so far with triggers and logic to give you some inspiration and some ideas of how to use the trigger and logic system to create different scenarios. So keep an eye out for future videos on that. But like I said, before we get to that, I want to cover at least one more video on the mission editor with the trigger zone system. So keep an eye out next week for that. And until then, this is Laco S signing out.